Hello, I'm Jayne Ozanne, and I'm Director of the Ozanne Foundation and Director of the Global Interfaith Commission on LGBT Lives. I set up the Ban Conversion Therapy Coalition recently, which brings together all the LGBT groups, survivor groups, faith leaders, and academics who are working together for a ban on conversion therapy. And I would suggest that one of the most prevalent forms of conversion therapy over the years has been forced marriage. In a range of cultures and indeed religious settings, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex and asexual and queer people have all often been told through the ages that what they needed to do, what was expected of them to do, was to be married, to settle down, to have children, and quote, to put up with the fact that they were not attracted to, in love with, or desiring of their spouse. And what has come to light recently in research that both the government has done and indeed at my own foundation have done is the trauma and harm that this has caused to people of all ages and of all sexualities. The normative lifestyle that is espoused in our society is for a young boy or girl to fall in love with someone from the opposite sex. They are fed stories from childhood, fairy tales of princes and princesses, someone of the opposite sex, who they will fall in love with and indeed settle down and marry. And I speak from personal experience here because that is the lifestyle that I saw as the only acceptable lifestyle. And as a Christian growing up in a Christian home, I truly believed that anything else was sinful and abomination. So when in my 20s, I was quite shocked to find myself falling in love with a woman. That took me to a place where I privately was in agony because I thought who I was sinful, but then began to seek out conversion therapy. And I know that many who've been in my place have been told that what the norm for them to do in this situation is either to stay single and celibate for life or to marry someone of the opposite sex. In a sense, they're consenting to it, but I would suggest it's forced because it is the option of not agreeing to do this is so high that one is rejected by one's friends and families and by one's immediate community. Indeed, in the research that we did as the Ozanne Foundation, we brought together a very senior board of statisticians chaired by the former Chair of the Royal College of Statisticians, Professor Sir Bernard Silverman, and the Bishop of Manchester, Bishop David Walker, who is the lead bishop on statistics for the Church of England. And they, with a group of others in 2018, supported by the Government Equalities Office, conducted the Faith and Sexuality Survey. And we were able to go to LGBTQ people across the faith groups and indeed from secular society. And out of the 4,500 people who responded, 468 had admitted that they'd been through conversion therapy. And we were therefore able to ask why they had chosen to put themselves through such a thing, if indeed they'd chosen. Many actually had said that they'd been forced. And we found that nearly 3/4, 72%, had said they'd gone through it because they believed who they were was sinful. 2/3 because they were ashamed of their desires, that internalized homophobia that they'd been taught from such a young age. And nearly a half had said because their religious leader disapproved, and another half had said because they wanted to leave a straight life and because they wanted to be married. And I'd suggest that that motivation, if you like, is because of the norms that those people, young and old, mostly young, many under the age of 18, but also young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds, they had imbibed that heterosexual normativity from a very young age. I'd go as far as echoing Jonathan Cooper, a very respected barrister who's recently written about this, and he has talked about the way that LGBT people have been groomed from childhood to believe in certain norms that they must accept. And that is that in order to have children, or indeed to have an acceptable lifestyle, they must settle down and be married to someone of the opposite sex. Now, I think there is a difference, dare I say, between gay and lesbian members of the society. In a patriarchal society, gay men who are encouraged, particularly in Christian communities, just as much as, dare I say, across other faith communities, but it is pretty common in Christian communities for gay men to be advised to get married and, quote, just put up with it, but with the expectation that they may have affairs on the side. For lesbian women, it's far more complicated, because actually their place in society means that actually it's not possible to live a double life, and indeed to enter into a heterosexual marriage is far more costly for them. The concept of, sadly, forced rape or marital rape is quite a norm for many in this situation, and it is something that leads all to a very dark and difficult place. Their mental health suffers terribly. But more importantly, the level of attempted suicide is extremely high. The research that I talked about in 2018 showed of those who'd been through conversion therapy and had problems as a result, 2/3 had suicidal ideation and 1/3 had attempted suicide. 1/3 had attempted suicide. Living a life where one is forced to be something one is not, where one is put in a close situation with another person who may be a good friend, but who one is not in love with, who one does not desire, and who one does not find desirable, is, I believe, one of the most torturous things that we can do to an individual. Indeed, the UN itself has said that conversion therapy is a form of torture. It is a form of psychological harm, and sadly, in certain cases, physical harm too, which governments are obliged under international law to protect people from. So I think we have to look very carefully at the concept of conversion therapy, which is an umbrella term. It can mean any form of intervention that looks to change, cure, cancel, or suppress one's sexuality. And that would include pretending to be something someone isn't, and settling down, in inverted commas, to a marriage where one is expected to have children. We need to look and be honest about the impacts that our normative society has had on the lesbian and gay and bisexual, transgender, queer and intersex communities, and see what teaching that they have been given from such a young age that has caused them to go down such traumatic and harmful routes as conversion therapy. And together, I think we need to look at how we provide a different narrative, one that allows people to accept who they are, to explore in a safe space, and to come to a point of peace about their sexual orientation and gender identity, and then be free to choose the person that they love, to create a union based on love and mutual respect, which is lifelong, and that we then in society look to celebrate, honour and thank for.